Our next speaker on day 2 of our conference is an award-winning and very well-accomplished CEO, Leonor Stjepic. She will be talking about the future of work and focusing on the role of women in the digital age. Leonor is an award-winning social entrepreneur whose career has spanned both the private and NGO sectors, and she's currently the CEO of the Montessori Group. Previously, she was also the CEO of the Medical Research Institute Raft, where she spun out a commercial company called Smart Matrix Limited, and managed to raise $8 million in social investment. Leonor is also a Meaningful Business 100 entrepreneur and multiple award winner, including the most innovative CEO in the non-profit sector in 2017. She explores the role of women in the digital economy and technology and gives us lots of practical tips on survival for women in a male-dominated corporate world. She also shares her views on gender bias and how this can be avoided by early intervention, drawing on her experience in the Montessori Group. Enjoy the session, and we are sure it's going to leave you with food for thought. Hi, Leonor. We are so glad to have you here with us, Leonor, and thank you for joining us at the Inspired conference.
An honor. It's an honor to be asked. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've been looking at your really illustrious background and all the various leadership positions that you've been involved in. So we are so interested to hear what you are going to share about, especially the women in this digital age. Very interesting topic, and I think that our readers will also be very, very interested to hear your views. So maybe we can just start by thinking about the changes that have happened over the last, as a result of innovation and all the dynamic opportunities that has come up, and which actually has changed roles within the workspace. How do you think has it affected women?
I think it has provided an opportunity. I think that as well as a disadvantage. So in terms of the opportunity, so let me just sort of share with you how much it's changed. When I started working, I remember that I was one of the first people to have an electric typewriter. And this was seen as, whoa, an electric typewriter, and then had the first computer in the organization, which I had to learn, and the hardware that went with the computer filled a room. So we've moved on a huge amount, where we've now got more processing power in our phones than we did when I first started work so many decades ago. And I think that the opportunities is that it's allowed us all to be a lot more mobile, a lot more flexible. We've all seen from COVID that it's allowed us to work from home, which has really shifted the working pattern a huge amount in a very positive way. I think that it has allowed us to collaborate and communicate more globally. When I was first working, everything was by letter or fax or telex. And if you've got a response in sort of a day, it was like, whoa, this is really exciting. Now we sort of get responses instantaneously, and look at what we're doing. We're having a conference when I'm sitting in London and you're sitting in Malaysia. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. And that has benefited women, I think, because it's not so much the dependence on the strong physical hard labor work. For a lot of working women have got the opportunity to go into roles where they can have a good economic living. So I think it's been a sort of significant shift. The disadvantage, of course, is it means that technology means that we're constantly available. And there is that expectation of people sort of answering quickly. And so often I think it's the technology that's blamed, but it's actually our use of the technology more than anything. So there's, on the whole, I think it's more advantageous than disadvantageous.
So if you, and I'd like to elaborate because that's quite an interesting point that you're making. It's not the technology, but it's our use of technology. How do you think do we actually, what can we do differently? And especially, I think it might be general, not just for women, but for users in general. What would you be referring to?
I think it's not be a slave to it. I mean, we are sort of allowing ourselves to be programmed to respond to every alert on our phones. And I'm particularly worried because I see that quite a lot in the younger generations, where you know, not having your phone is seen as, you know, well, I'll give you an example. I was on a business trip with a younger colleague, and she left her phone behind, and I had my phone with me. We were going from one town to another. I was able to ring and make sure her phone was safe, and she was almost panicking because she didn't have her phone. And I said, well, but, you know, we've got my phone. You know, if we need to make a phone call, you can use my phone. Yes, but, you know, and her concern was around social media. How am I going to look at my social media? You know, and I just thought, well, this is just, you know, ridiculous. So she was almost panicking about it. You know, I know a lot of people who, if they don't have phone coverage and can't look at kind of Google Maps or something, think, how am I going to get around? Well, you know, you get around by asking someone, or just trying to sort of look around where you are and looking at street signs and trying to work it out. Again, I suppose, you know, the advantage for me is you know, I didn't have that when I was growing up. So I had to learn how to read a map. I had to learn how to kind of judge, okay, am I going in the right direction? So I think there's, you know, we have to understand that the technology is there for us. You know, we shouldn't be the ones being slaves to the technology. And it's quite all right to switch off the alert on your phone. It's quite all right to switch off your phone. You know, if, you know, there's nothing horrible is going to happen if you don't look at your mobile phone every 10 minutes.
And it's a very valid point. I think it also reflects on the generation gap. You know, your millennials and your Gen Zs and people that are born into technology versus people that are born were born without technology or before technology has reached its zenith that it has today. And given this view of, you know, the change, the opportunities that has come for women as a result of the digital revolution, what would you say are still some common barriers that women are facing in the digital age?
I think it's the access to technology. I mean, clearly there is a big gap. This has been identified by OECD and others, IMF, about access to technology in some countries for women. I think that we need to sort of look at that really carefully if we want to move forwards as a sort of global society. I think there is, it's true to say that the software writing and the people who write algorithms tend to be male, and so there's been a lot of concern around, you know, unconscious bias or conscious bias occasionally. So, you know, and our lives are so regulated by algorithms. You know, what insurance quote you get for your car, you know, what gets sort of pushed at you through the internet. You know, I find it really funny because I have a name that isn't, you know, it's not easily understood whether it's male or female, and because I'm a CEO, I get huge amount of advertising that comes up on my feed that's actually clearly aimed at men. And not at me. So clearly there's an algorithm there that has worked out something. And I thought, well, there's an unconscious bias that because I'm a CEO, there is a sort of an assumption, you know, it's been written into the algorithm that I must be a man, right? You know, because it can't be a woman if I'm a CEO. So I think we have to encourage more women to go. There has to be more diversity also in tech, and that comes, I think, from a really early age. We have to encourage more women into STEM and understanding that STEM is
it's still a fact that if you look at the statistics, what the percentage of women or girls that choose STEM subjects at school, and hence it's logical that as they go into the workplace or they choose to study in the field, the percentages just keep on dropping. And that trend doesn't seem to change. What would you suggest? What can be done, especially with your education background as well?
Yeah.
Maybe you could offer a few insights.
Well, I think it does come from education. So I think it needs to start from a really early education of in the nursery. Children at that early, and we do this in Montessori, at that early age have to be it has to be demystified. So, for example, what we do in Montessori, which I think is very powerful and very effective, is everything is tied to what we call activities of everyday living. So everything has a practical application. So if you actually look at what children in the nursery do, in a Montessori nursery do, they are doing physics, they are doing maths, they are understanding how to do coding. We don't call it that. We don't say you're going to learn how to do coding now, or you're going to learn maths now, you're going to learn physics. But the activities are designed that actually encourages children to think that way. So I think there's education is one. The second thing is, and I will say I am the same. For me, I don't have an interest in technology because I suppose when I was growing up and as I've sort of gone through my life, technology is seen as something complicated and abstract that I don't have time for. But it's really technology is about everyday living. It is about practical things. I need to understand how to use a mobile phone because I need that for my work. I need to understand how to use Zoom. I need to understand, so in a way, I am quite technologically wise because I do it in an everyday, scenario. I drive a car. When I think of technology in that sense, it doesn't put me off because I do want to know. I do want to know why isn't my Zoom working? Why isn't my computer working? What happens if I do this? How can I filter my emails? All of those things that make my life easier, that make me able to be more effective at work and at home, are things that I'm interested in. And they are technologically, but if you said to me, we're going to send you off on a computer science course or a technology course, I'd go, oh God, no, that's not for me. So I think this is about the language and about about demystifying it and making it more, sort of making people understand that this is part of life. This is now the way that we live, and it's how we label things. I think is quite important.
And it's very unfortunate due to the way that the school curriculums are developed, that you do have these silos, and as you say, there's people are even in some systems at a very young age asked to choose between the science stream and the humanities stream, and each comes with its own associations. That I think that's a comprehensive look at how do we. It's not just a question of developing skills in a particular subject; it's a mindset change.
Exactly, absolutely. So, what the biggest shift in education is going to have to be, we're going to have to stop asking people, children, young people, to absorb knowledge and teach them how to have more meta skills. So it's not about specific knowledge base. And you're right. We have this. This happened to me. I had to choose between science or the arts. Couldn't do both. Well, actually, I know I ran a medical research institute before I did this job, and scientists I worked with were very creative people who loved music, who loved the arts. why couldn't they have done both? Why couldn't they have done both? So I think we have to move away from that specialist, that idea of specialist, because in the workplace in the future, there will be no specialisms in that sense of specialist knowledge, because you can get knowledge anywhere. I can, if I want to know something, even something very technical, I can Google it. I can, as a non-technical person, probably somewhere on the internet, find a YouTube video or, a Google article that will explain something to me that's very, very technical, and I can probably work my way through. So I don't need to know that knowledge. I don't need to learn it and absorb it and remember it. But what I do need to know is I need to have the skills to actually try and understand what is it saying to me, and how do I apply this? And you're right, that sort of education, the education model that we have now is not fit for purpose for the future. And we're doing children a disservice by not making those changes now.
I attended that's absolutely, Leonor. I attended a workshop on neuroscience, Harvard workshop. And, there's so many myths about the brain, and, your left brain or your right brain, or women think like this, and, women's brains are wired like this, and men's brains are wired like that. And a very interesting point that was raised was, it comes also from gender stereotyping and the toys that children are given when they're small. So girls get dolls and boys get blocks and cars and things that they can build and construct. I know there's not an absolute, and I know not all parents do that, but I think that's already where parents can also play an important role around changing this stereotyping. What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, in Montessori, for example, and Maria Montessori was a doctor, so she sort of created this education method based on scientific observation. We have activities that all children take part in, regardless. So, little girls in nurseries play with building blocks and in shapes and learn about sizes. The same as little boys do. And little boys take part in what we, call the kind of household activities, which is the sweeping and the washing and the, washing up, and the, grading colours, the same as the little girls do. And that's why, neuroscience has shown that children exposed to Montessori, their brains do develop differently, because you lose that. And it is those very early, it's from 0 to 7, that's where all the sort of formative experiences and skills are learnt. Parents can do it, the family can do it, schools can do it, about ensuring that, yes, there is no pushing children into certain patterns of thinking, but just children have an innate curiosity. Children, people forget that. The children have an innate curiosity. They want to touch things, they want to do things, and they have no preconceptions of whether they should be doing something or they shouldn't be doing something unless they're told so. So it is part of that shift in education that we need to make.
If we go back to women in the digital age and the participation in, for example, software development, some research, OECD research, shows that only 14% of software development teams have women in them. And there's this huge disparity. Statistic is around the willingness to invest in, for women to get that investment. It's much harder than for men. And I don't know, what do you think can be done about that?
I mean, that's a societal perception. And in fact, generally, it's harder for women to get investment than it is for men, because there's a sort of misperception that women are somehow not financial or not business-like or not commercial. And again, I think that goes down to what do we understand by those phrases, or what are the perceptions that have been created around authority and ability and competency in the commercial world. One of the most innovative and successful AI companies I know, AI sort of software development companies I know, is run by a woman. So that shows that it really doesn't really matter. I think it is very much about, again, starting to break down those perceptions, or stopping those perceptions from being formed at an early age. You know, if we encourage little girls at a very early age to think of software as writing or IT or technology as a career, because why shouldn't they? And little boys as well, so there's no barriers to that. And I think that's the way forward. That's a long-term plan. But I think there's also, I think that we need to highlight more of those women that are actually doing these roles. So I think there's a role for the media as well, because there's, I think one of the best ways to break down barriers is for there to be role models, so people can say, oh, all right, yeah, that person does it. And if they can do it, then why can't I do it? And that's not just with gender, but with diversity as well. You really want to sort of see diverse role models in these companies, and and I'm sure that they exist, and companies do have these employees. So companies should also sort of do more to push these sort of people who don't fit the norm, the stereotype, out into the public arena and get them to talk and encourage interviews, so that there's a sort of a sense of, as I said, this woman. So for example, this woman Devi, who and I did sort of say to her, you really need to be getting out there more and talking more, because it will show young women that actually here you are, a successful woman running an AI company.
And it's very interesting that you've mentioned the role of media. And if you look at the way that social media and communication has changed, or social media has changed the way we communicate. And it's sort of raised a lot of hidden or things that were not openly talked about in the past. So I think a few campaigns like the Me Too movement, or Change the Ratio movement, or the Equal Pay movement, that has come to the fore to counteract injustices against women. Do you think these are to be encouraged? Do you think that these are used responsibly, and that social media can play an important role in redefining our views of the roles of women and men?
Well, I think they can. So if you think of social media, and people are, we talk a lot about social media because it's so prevalent in our lives. If you go back in history, it was leaflets. People would put posters and leaflets up, or write things on walls. So that kind of mass communication has always existed to a certain extent. It's just that we now have it. It's more global. It's easier to access. You can do it from anywhere. So I think it has. It could, again. It goes back to my view that it's not the technology that's wrong. It's how we use it. And I think that there's, like all technology, could have a very positive way of getting a message across. It's a way of getting a message across very, very quickly and gathering support very, very quickly. A campaign that might have taken, if you look at the Me Too movement, for example, prior to social media, that could have been a campaign. Well, look at the campaign to get women the vote. I mean, that was a campaign that took years and years and years and years and years, because we didn't have the ability to communicate so quickly globally. So I think there's a real sort of positive side to it. But again, it's how the technology has, we haven't caught up with how to use the technology properly yet. And I think we've all seen examples of where it has been abused, where it has been sort of used for worse purposes. For example, in the UK, it's very common that if a woman there was a campaign, for example, to put, I think it was Florence Nightingale on one of our notes, our currency, and the woman, and you think, that is so innocuous and so inoffensive. How could anyone object to that? You know, I mean, you know, does it matter? You know, it's not like you're going to look at your £10 note before you pass it over and buy something with it. And yet, the woman who sort of came up with the idea talks about receiving huge amounts of very disturbing sort of messages on social media, you know, with threats and all sorts of things. So there is obviously you know, sort of a dark side to it. And like, again, I think it's about education. It's about, we haven't really learned how to use social media properly yet, because it was created and it came about, and then suddenly, you know, no one really knows how to manage it. We haven't actually sort of taught children in schools, you know, how to do it properly, how to think, you know, responsibly about it.
Yeah. So we can also say advancement is a double-edged sword.
But it always is. It always is.
It always is, right? So it is about using things responsibly. Now, there's the whole focus on automation, right? With driverless cars, we have, you know, a rise in the robotics, drones delivering your orders, and, you know, the rise of AI makes people feel that it becomes a threat rather than an advantage. How do you think, or is it something that could be an advantage for women and strengthening women's position in the industry? Because, you know, the typical physical, as you mentioned earlier, physical jobs that required physical labor, which sometimes can be seen still as a differentiator between genders. Could this be something that could also be an advantage for women?
I think that, I mean, all technology, I mean, we are in a revolution. We're in a digital revolution, and you know, when we had the Industrial Revolution, I'm sure there were people that were feeling just as worried and concerned about industrialization as there are now people worried about, you know, digitization or the digital revolution. And obviously, that massive sort of socioeconomic shift is going to have winners and losers. There will be jobs that will be lost. And actually, you know, the jobs that will be lost, the jobs that are probably the ones that require tasks or activities that are more mundane. So if you think about the Industrial Revolution, what the Industrial Revolution was, it created, you know, a workforce that acted as parts of a machine. And so those were the skills that were, you know, if you think about, you know, old-fashioned type factory working, or you know, that was you know, you became a part of the machine. You know, feeding the machine. That's moving away with the digital technology. So the skills that are going to be needed are completely different. And I think that there is definitely a real concern that a lot of the more sort of automated tasks that actually predominantly women do in a lot of countries will go. So that does have an impact on female, you know, ability to earn. But I think there are opportunities, and the opportunities are this, that, you know, the skills that we're going to need for the future are skills around communication, thinking collaboratively, creativity, and as we've seen with COVID, not necessarily need to be based in a specific space. You know, you can work from home, you can do it from home. And I think that offers a huge amount of opportunities to women who perhaps before would not have, you know, because those skills, and actually even now they're still not valued, but those skills are skills that, you know, are, you know, kind of women, I think, are better at communication and collaboration. I think it's innate. It comes from, you know, we didn't have to go out and hunt, you know, and be very focused. And, you know, we were sort of, you know, growing crops and looking after the children and sort of working in already, you know, back in the beginning of time. So I think that there are, you know, it gives women an advantage to be able to sort of bring to the forefront those skills that we probably practice on an everyday basis anyhow. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. There are a huge amount of opportunities. but it's going to be an incredibly difficult time. But it was a very difficult time when there was the Industrial Revolution, and there was a very difficult time when there was the Agricultural Revolution. It's just that we look back on history and we sort of forget that bit. We forget what it felt like for, you know, ordinary working people to go through that. We think about, oh, look, they did all this, you know. And I suppose in history, you know, in 50 or 100 years' time, people will look back at this time and they go, oh, look, they had computers and they did this and they invented all that, without thinking of actually what does it mean for, you know, ordinary everyday people and their jobs and their ability to work.
Yeah. What do you think is the role of legislation in closing the gender gap and closing this gap? If I think of the 2019 G20 summit, where the leaders, the world leaders, pledged to reduce this gender gap and to by 25% by 2025. Now, should more legislation be put in place to drive this agenda, or do you think it should be a more organic process?
I think legislation has an important part because legislation sends a message. However, and I think it's because I'm older now, my experience has been that top-down change doesn't work, or isn't as effective as change that happens bottom-up. Ideally, you want both. And I think that, and we see this in business, you know, you see this when you run an organization. If you wanted to create change, I mean, I'm doing my 4th transformation. You really need everybody to buy in and go on this journey. Not everyone will, but you need the majority. And I think that if you know, doing legislation is great, it sends a strong message. But if you don't get buy-in by the people that actually have the soft power, legislation can be, there's always a way of getting around it. You know, someone, if they don't want to do something, they'll find a way of getting around legislation. You know, we all know this. You know, we all know that people bend the rules, break the laws, you know, the whole time. And I think that there has to be, so it has to be more than that. I think there has to be, if you're going to stop that gender gap, you know, the conversation has to be with those people that have the soft power. So you need to go and talk to people who are running organizations and say to them, there's plenty of research that shows this, that actually you want diversity, you know, you want a diverse talent pool. And in order to have a diverse talent pool, you have to, and, you know, be fair about what you pay and how you invest in women, as well as men. And there's a, you know, and it helps your bottom line. You know, there's a very good business reason for doing this. You have to create those, you have to, you know, have the conversations with the people that have the soft power and persuade them as well. Because otherwise it sounds great. But as I said, you know, there's lots of legislation at the moment around a lot of things. And we all know that it gets, you know, subverted or, you know, avoided.
It's basically, it's a multifaceted approach. It's looking at mindsets. It looks at regulations. It's about enabling and creating pathways for women. A very interesting finding from the OECD report was also quite hopeful in terms of women in tech, and that was that venture capitalists who had a woman on the board were 80% more likely to fund women-based teams or teams with women in. So I think as the change happens in the management structures, that, you know, people will see, you mentioned earlier that one of the most successful tech companies that you know is run by a woman. Why would you say that is?
I think it's, again, I think it's because, and this has been proven, that I think, and she's got a very diverse group of team around her. She's a big believer in diversity. And I think that it's that diversity helps. I think that being able to not think that you've got all the answers is really important. And I think that women are quite good at doing that. They're quite good at sort of, you know, sort of asking questions. They don't feel that somehow it's undermining their authority if they ask a lot of questions. I mean, I'll give you an example, and this is part of my management style. I'm very happy to go into a meeting with my team and say, look, I don't know the answers to this. You know, I'm not the expert here. I have no idea, and I may be wrong. Please tell me if I'm wrong. You know, that sort of doesn't feel, I don't feel I undermine my authority by doing that. And I think there's that element of it. I think there's an element of, as you say, you know, it is changing, and you are getting more senior women on boards and at sort of exec team level, which I think helps. And there's a huge amount of research that shows that you know, that diversity helps businesses. So yes, of course, if you're going to bring, you know, if you're going, and again, it's what I go back to. You've got to have that conversation, and it's got to be meaningful. So I'll give you an analogy with COVID. You know, people followed lockdown because people understood that actually it can affect me, or it can affect someone around me. But even with, well, certainly in the UK, I don't know other parts of the world, and well, actually, I happen to know that in other parts of the world it's true as well. Not everybody followed lockdown, and yet it was a government regulation. So that's why I've seen about it has to be, there has to be that constant, you know, communication and understanding, and making it to, and giving people a reason why it makes sense to them. You know, it's not about it because it's the right thing to do necessarily, but to explain that actually it's the right thing to do, and it's going to help you become more successful in business if you do this.
You've just mentioned, and that's, I mean, this point of diversity and inclusion just keeps on coming up, and it's something that many of our speakers, regardless of the area that we are focusing on in our conference, have mentioned the importance of diversity, of compassion, of inclusion. And something that you've mentioned is you've just said that you've gone through the fourth transformation. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, yes. So I'm sort of I quite like making things better. That's just kind of what interests me. And so this will be the fourth organization that I've gone in where we're trying to shift the mindset. So we're making it into a growth organization. We are changing the way that we do things. So I tend to be recruited for in my CEO roles for organizations where they may be a bit stuck, or they may have got to a certain stage, or it may be early stage and they need to change. And it's that change and transformation is what I think makes life interesting. So this will be the fourth one that I do.
So how do you find being a CEO in what still is a very male-dominated world? I mean, from your, if you don't mind sharing maybe some experiences that you've had, or some strategies perhaps that you've developed to help you really cope with that.
So I think partly also because it's my age, because you know, when I started working, there were no senior female women, there were no role models. I mean, I have it has been hard, and I have often been in a room where I am the only senior woman in the room, or sat at a board meeting where I am the only woman in the room. And so that you know, so I've had experiences where, for example, one meeting where something was, you know, I came up with an idea and I said, look, I really think we should be doing this, and nobody listened, and it was all male. And then my finance director said exactly the same thing, and everyone went, oh yes, that's a great idea. Now how? And to his credit, he did turn around and say, well, Leonor said that 10 minutes ago. So that was, you know, to his credit. I have been in board meetings where, you know, something's been suggested and I could see straight away it wasn't going to be a good idea, and I said, no, this is not a good idea. And I'm not someone that shouts and screams and bangs the table, but you know, I was very calmly saying, look, I really don't think this is a good idea. These are the reasons why I don't think it's a good idea. And I was accused of being emotional. You know, oh, well, you're taking an emotional view. Like, first of all, that's a bad thing, and secondly, I wasn't actually being emotional, I was being quite logical. So you know, I've had those experiences. I think what has helped me personally is, I would say it's three things. The first thing is I've learned how to have resilience, emotional resilience. You know, I think you have to be, in any case, in order to get into a senior role, you have to be emotionally very resilient. And in a world of change, you have to be very emotionally resilient. So that's been very, very helpful. So I've sort of thought, well, I've learned how to not take it personally. I've thought, well, if, I've sort of taken the attitude that, well, if that's the way you think, that says more about you than it says about me. It's not about me being wrong. It's about your attitude. So I've learned that resilience. I think that's really important. I think that, spending time worrying about how something has made you feel is not helpful if you're trying to sort of make a change. I think you just have to say, well, that's your view, you're entitled to it, but it says more about you than it says about me. I think the second thing is actually having a support network, because sometimes it can get very, very difficult. I was having a conversation actually with someone 2 days ago who's a very successful woman, has 3 companies, outwardly very, very sort of strong, successful woman. And she said to me, she said, I had a really difficult couple of days. She said, I felt very weak, very vulnerable. And I said to her, well, that's because you're human, you're allowed to feel that way. And you're going through a difficult time right now. And you're juggling a lot of things, and, her business has been affected by coronavirus and the whole situation. I said, that's fine to feel that way. But I also understood that she needed that safe space to be able to say that. And she felt she could say that with me. So I'm part of her network. And I think that's really important. I think you need to have that network of, when you need to have that conversation sometimes to say, actually, I feel really awful about this. I feel really awful. I feel really worried. I feel very scared. I feel very angry, and have a safe place to do it. Now, that could be your family, that could be friends, it could be, a mentor, it could be, but I think that's really essential for people. Particularly for a woman trying to kind of make it. And the third is, if you don't ask for respect, you won't get it. If you don't expect to be respected, you won't get it. And you have to think about how you do this, and sometimes it is about just being quite, if someone says something, just being, polite, but quite firm, that actually that's not acceptable. I'm not happy that you've said that to me, and sort of call them out on it. Sometimes it's better to do that quietly. It's about understanding when to, choosing your moment, sort of perhaps, after a meeting or something, pulling them to one side and saying, actually, that really wasn't acceptable. And next time I will call you out publicly. I don't want to embarrass you now, but I will do it because that's not acceptable. So I think there's something about that kind of, and I know that it may sound that's very easy to do when you're the CEO, but if you don't start building that way, behaving in that way when you're further down the line, and I started further down the line, then you are, it's a bit like learning how to swim or riding a bike. The more you do it, the better you get at it, and so I think that's really important. I think that's just important, whoever you are, and that's not, and it's about doing it in an appropriate way, or in a way that isn't necessarily aggressive. And I think you don't have to be aggressive to get your own way, or to sort of get someone to understand your point of view. You can do it in a firm way, but a way that actually makes them feel that you're not having a go at them. Because I think that's the problem, when it becomes confrontational, then you don't get listened to. So if you can do it in a way that's not confrontational. Is that, I'm not sure if that makes sense.
You mentioned you have, I mean, it's always to be able to be authentic, but also knowing, how to behave professionally. It's that balancing act, not to give up your womanhood or your female identity in order to fit in with the norm, but at the same time, I think it must be quite a balancing act at times for you.
Well, I think it's become less of a balancing act as I've got older, because it's like, this is it. This is who I am. You know? This is what you're going to get. But there's a certain, I think there is a balancing act. But I think if you're authentic, and you play to your strengths, and I think that's it took me time to learn this. As I said, when I first started work, there were no female role models. There was no one I could look to and say, okay, yes, that's how you do it as a woman. And so certainly very early in my career, and I was working in the city in London bank, as a woman, one of the very few women in the organization that was, you know, in a slightly more sort of senior role. I wasn't in a senior role, but I was kind of in a slightly more sort of exposed role. You know, I genuinely felt I had to, you know, behave like the men did in order to get on. I really did, and it made me very unhappy, to the point that I started getting ill. And I didn't realize this, and it was quite funny. I sort of just kept having all these colds and flus and being off, and my employer sent me to have medical tests, and I had a really good female doctor who did all these tests, and she at the end of it said, well, she said, let me tell you what your problem is. I said, okay, thinking, oh my God, what have I got? And she said, you hate your job. And I went, oh. She said, yeah, you're not being, you know, that's it. You're trying to be someone you're not all the time. And it's having it's actually having a physical effect on you. All that stress is having a physical effect on you. And that was one of those kind of, you know, light bulb moments when I suddenly went, oh, okay. And that's when I started thinking, well, no, I'm not going to do that then. And then I realized that actually the way I am has a number of, you know, I can use it to actually achieve things. I can use it to my advantage. I can use it to achieve things. And so I sort of, that's how I started behaving, and that's how I started leading. And I have had, you know, chairs say to me, oh yes, but, you know, to be a leader, you know, you have to do this, 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 and this. And I've said to them, well, no, that's how you're a leader, but it's not how I'm a leader. And I don't think that my way is any less effective than yours. It's different. Yours may be effective for you because it plays to your strengths and your character, but it wouldn't, you know, but if I behaved in that way, it wouldn't feel natural, and I wouldn't be able to do it. And the way I do things is my way. You know, that doesn't mean to say that I can't be, you know, I can't make difficult decisions, or I can't be, you know, sort of, I'm trying to think of the right word, not ruthless, but you know, I can make the decisions I need to make and see them through. You know, it doesn't make me soft and weak. It just makes me, you know, if I have to be in that way, you know, and make difficult decisions, I will do. But that doesn't mean to say that I have to be aggressive and assertive and confrontational all the time, because that's not my character. Other people do behave that way, and that works for them, and that's fair enough. That's their character. That's for them. So yeah.
That is being authentic, isn't it? You know, and as you said earlier, it's playing to your strengths as a leader and as a CEO. You also mentioned that you need a support network, but I wanted to ask you about your views on networking and collaboration in the in the professional way, and how that actually has helped you in your companies and projects. Do you believe, I mean, in today's age, I don't think anybody can say I can do it alone. So how do you feel, how much attention should somebody pay to building those collaborative networks?
Huge, particularly early on in your career. I think it's really important to have those networks. And I would say that be very careful about making sure you get the right networks, and get networks of diverse groups of people. It's fine to be part of a professional network where everybody, you know, is in the same profession. That's fine, but don't just have that. also have a network of people who are doing different things. I find it so incredibly powerful and helpful when I've got a problem to talk to someone who may be in a different industry, because they may come up with a solution that I hadn't thought of, or they might have done something that I hadn't thought of, but I could adapt for my own sector. I'll give you an example of how this worked when I was running a medical research institute. One of the problems, so we were working in wound healing, and that was the specialism. It still is the specialism. The organisation still exists. And I had a conversation with someone in the oil industry. Now you might think medical research, oil industry, completely different sectors. How can one help the other? And I was saying to them that one of the issues that surgeons had with surgical glue was actually, which is glue that you use to close wounds, was actually, obviously a wound is a wet, it's a moist environment. And sort of how do you create glues that actually kind of are really strong within that moist environment without actually creating problems in the wound healing? And it was a big issue. And he said to me, he said, we have spent years and years and years, and he says, God knows how many millions of dollars trying to think how we get barnacles off lines, pipes and sort of cables. And because they have a sort of a natural adhesive that makes them stick, and we've had to reverse engineer that. And I said, well, actually, that's really fascinating, because actually, if we reverse engineer what you've done, then we've come up with a solution. Now, I would not have thought of that if I hadn't had that conversation with that person. So that's just a very practical example of how having networks with lots of different people in them can be really powerful. I've done something called the Windsor Leadership Trust, which program, which is here in the UK, where they do exactly that, where they get senior leaders from all different backgrounds, put us together in effectively a room for a week, and we just talk about sort of a particular issue that is a general issue. And for example, one time we had a conversation around, how do you behave as a leader in a world that's becoming increasingly more transparent? And we had a fascinating conversation. So, one of the, people in my group was actually head of counterterrorism, and we had people from the armed forces, we had people from private sector, people from charities, people from public sector. And it's a common problem for everyone, and everyone was coming up with different solutions. I learned a lot. From that. So those sort of again, it goes back to diversity. Those diverse networks of hearing, how other people tackle things is, I feel, often more powerful than speaking to a group of people who are your peers in the same sector.
Very interesting. Sorry, is that you're mentioning that you should try these, you should start building these networks from when you are young. Yeah. I think many young professionals, or even at student level, feel hesitant to reach out to people that could be a mentor or just a role model. So that's a very good recommendation that you're making for young people, is to really start building those networks.
And mentoring,
not be hesitant, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I do a lot of mentoring, and I can understand sometimes, people I mentor have said, oh, I was a bit hesitant because you're so busy. And I said, well, if I'm busy, I'll tell you, and I have had to sometimes say to people, I mean, I think I have 6 mentees at the moment. And I have had, other people come and say, would you mentor me? And I've had to say, look, I'm really sorry, no, I can't at the moment. I don't have capacity, but you might want to try someone else. You might want to try this person. So yes, ask. Anyone in a senior role was once a junior person. We've all been there. We all know what it was like. We all understand. We get it. We're not going to sort of, I think it'd be very rare to find someone at a senior level who's going to go, oh, you know, they might say no because genuinely they don't have the time or the capacity, and that's fine, you know, and just go on to someone else. But most, in my experience, most people want to be helpful, and if they can, they will. And I think that yes, that sort of mentoring is really, you know, can be really, really helpful, because, as I said, you know, at my stage, we've probably gone through what they're going through, so can help them through it.
That's good advice. I'm sure you're going to be getting people knocking at your door after this conference. One of the core things we would like to achieve is to create a community of change, a collaboration of people across different disciplines. So I'm so glad that you've mentioned that, because it helps fill in those blind spots that we don't always realize that we have. And to solve the problems today in such a complex world, we do need those different insights. We cannot close the poverty gap or the education gap by just working with educationalists. Can't improve nutrition by just working with nutritionists and medical doctors. And that is the ambition. And I'm sure, Leonor, with all the different industries in which you've worked, you've also brought that depth of insight from one industry into the other.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I learned, let me tell you, the skills that I learned working in a Saturday job in a shop of how to deal with customers is something that's, you know, I've been able to adapt and evolve in dealing with, you know, in negotiating. That understanding of, okay, this person's come in, you know, they want to buy something. Why do they want to buy something? What are they looking for? You know, what are their, you know, what are their motivations? Now, when I was working in a shop as a Saturday girl, I wouldn't have been able to articulate that that's what I was doing, but those were the skills that I was learning whilst doing that. And as I said, those skills have evolved. And it's the same, you know, and again, not everyone has that kind of variety of working in different sectors, but you can learn those skills and you can evolve those skills by talking to people in lots of different sectors. So something like a community is really powerful.
That's a great piece of advice. I think so many people now, with having lost their businesses as a result of COVID, or as a result of digitization and automation, find themselves at a crossroads saying, well, where do I go? I am an engineer, or I am this, you know, I define myself in terms of my job or my career. But what you is actually really good advice, is take a step back and say, what skills do I have that can be transferred into a new job, into a new sector? And that's why focusing on skills, as you said at the beginning, rather than content, is so important in education.
Absolutely. And I think that there is, you know, those skills are, you know, we learn skills as we work that aren't even necessarily the skills that are related to that specific sector. So, you know, if you're working with a team, you're actually learning team working. Now, team working you can put into any sector. If you're learning how to manage a project, it may be an engineering project, it may be a medical project, it may be a technology project, but that project, you know, skills that you have are actually transferable. So yes, absolutely. You know, if you're in that situation, you know, as you say, take a step back and think about, well, what are the skills that I have that I could put to, and don't be afraid to go into another, you know, sector. Don't be afraid to try them out. I think a lot of people feel, and women are particularly bad at this. It's like, yes, but you know, I only have a skill in this. You know, I sit on an advisory board, and then we had a board meeting yesterday, and you know, the person who runs the business was saying, yes, but I know nothing about marketing. And we were saying, well, but A, you've got people on the board who do, and B, you know, what do you need to know? You know, what is it that you need to know? But she was almost like, oh, I can't do it because I haven't had this training. And it's almost like, well, doesn't matter for what you needed. You don't need to be you're not at a, your business is not at a stage where you need that expertise. You just need to have an understanding of it. So just go out and learn, just learn from other people. What is it that I need to think about? And use that. And I think that sort of, oh no, I'm not trained in this is just really bad.
Maybe that's a good last message to women in this digital age, is to don't undervalue yourself, don't have a fixed mindset, or allow that society's views of what and who you should be should limit you. And you can always learn, because that's the advantage that technology is bringing us. We can learn so much anywhere we are. Thank you very much for your insights.
Not at all. You're welcome.
Fantastic conversation, Leonor, and I'm sure that people in listening to you are going to say, I have to reach out to Leonor. I'm going to ask her to become my mentor. And we would love to see that kind of collaboration and that changed view of what women can be and can become in the industry could then change the lives of others. So thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on the successful work you're doing with the Montessori organization and all these companies and all your wonderful footsteps you've left in the corporate world. Have a lovely day, and thank you for your...
You too. Thank you very much. It's truly a privilege to be asked to speak, and I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.